On my channel, I talk a lot about social and political issues and economic issues facing people in the UK, particularly black people here in the UK. And I enjoy those videos. Those videos are very important because I feel like a lot of people, a lot of us don't realize how bad life is on a collective level for a lot of people here in the UK. So those are really important videos that I will, of course, continue to make. But my conscience is kind of burning me. My conscience is telling me that I need to also focus as well on another area, and that area is health. I started talking about it a little bit in my last video about looking at all of the different long-term conditions and health outcomes of people in the UK, broken down by ethnicity. You can check that out. And that's got me thinking that I must return to health as a topic. You've heard the term financial literacy. People talk about financial literacy. You've got to know what to do with your savings, investments, taxes, all that sort of stuff, which is very, very, very important, of course. But for me, when I think about all of the problems that we face as people, a lot of those problems come down to an inability that we have. We lack the ability to think clearly, we are dominated by our emotions. We are basically led by our bodies. We're led by what you might call our baser instincts, our lower instincts. We are trapped by depression, trapped by chronic disease and disorder. We're limited by poor health, basically ill health, mental health, which is getting worse and worse and worse socially over the last few years, particularly since the pandemic. But also physical health as well. Like I talked about in my previous video, something like nearly half of the people in this country are taking prescription medicines all the time. And for me, that's not right. And there's no point in telling somebody, right, this is the data with regard to, say, education, and these are the things that need to be done to ensure that children get a good education. There's no point in telling people that if they can't even compute that information in their heads, because their minds are so overburdened with the effects of mental illness, of mental disorders, psychiatric conditions, not to mention the brain and the body are completely interconnected. They're not really two separate things. And so not to mention the physical health problems. So I've got a series of podcasts that I did in 2024, yeah, where I focus particularly on light. And in this video, I've been doing a lot of reading on the topic of light. I'll just show you my notes here. That's what my notes look like. And it was, initially I was thinking, right, I'm going to make a big, long, whopping video all about the importance of light and circadian rhythms and this sort of stuff. But the more I'm researching, the more I'm reading, and I'm doing a lot of reading, printing stuff off and reading it, which has been brilliant to get my eyes off screens, which I'll talk about in a minute, why that's important. The more I'm reading, the more I'm realizing that these are enormous topics that can't be relegated to just one video, and it's on me. My conscience is telling me that I've got to dig into this sort of stuff and do the best that I can to make it interesting, accessible to people. So today in this video here, I want to give you a quick overview of the current thinking that I'm having with regard to some of these things. And the key point I want to say as well is that when it comes to health, sometimes we can feel like it's really complicated, like we've got to understand all these different things, and you go on YouTube or whatever, some social media, Instagram, and you'll find all these influencers telling you, oh right, yeah, you got to take this supplement, melatonin. Oh no, you got to take this supplement, nitric oxide. Oh no, you got to take this supplement, creatine. Oh no, you've got to take that. You know what I mean? You got to start drinking, green tea because that's rich in polyphenols. No, you don't want to take green. You want to be having a keto diet. You want to go vegan, cut out meat. There's so much. It's overload of information if you're on the internet a lot. And that is a problem because it frazzles our heads and we're like, oh, what the hell am I supposed to do? I just want to be healthy. And you know what, my people, my friend, it is very, very simple. A lot of it is very simple. And just to summarize this video, I think a lot of it comes down to sleep and light exposure. That's what a lot of it comes down to. Sleep, going to bed at a good time, waking up at a good time, getting outside in the daytime. That's what a lot of it comes down to. If we could start to do those things, and of course there's a bit more detail to that, but if we could start to do those things on a regular basis, I am pretty convinced that we will start to see some enormous improvements in our health and well-being, mentally and physically. So let me dig into some of these things. Like I said, I've got my spider diagram notes here, which are a bit all over the place. Also, let me show you this as well. That is a picture. I've done some drawings of the electromagnetic spectrum. And this is a drawing from my youngest 5-year-old who drew it and wanted to show. He was like, yeah, the longer wavelengths, that's infrared, and then down here is ultraviolet, you know. So I'm quite proud that at their young ages they're kind of starting to understand some of these things that I've only understood in my big old late age, you know, middle age. But anyway. So let's talk about sunshine. The sun, basically, we as humans have evolved to be out in the sunlight in the daytime. That's what we for the 99.99% of our existence as a species, Homo sapiens sapiens, or as humans, you know, if you want to take a young Earth creationist angle, all right, well, for the 99% of those few thousand years that we've been around as humans since, you know, Adam and Eve were created or whatever, we have had a very simple and a very clear relationship to the sun. It's been bright light in the daytime, bright natural daylight in the daytime, and rich darkness at night. And then when you look at all organisms on the planet Earth, that's the case. They all evolved or were created or exist in tandem with the light environment. I believe ultraviolet light in particular, which is one of the strongest forms of light that comes to Earth from the sun, was particularly critical to the sprouting of life on Earth. And our bodies and our minds are tuned or are designed to be in tune with the rhythms of the sun. When you think about it, so the term circadian, circadia, that means circadiem actually. Circa is around, Latin term for around, diem means day. Circadian rhythms, the humans and all other animals and loads of other organisms, all of our bodily functions are in tune with the cycles of the relationship between the sun and the earth. When it's daytime, basically, where, you know, loads of certain bodily functions happen and they're supposed to happen in the daytime. When it's nighttime, other bodily functions are supposed to happen. And that's how we've evolved as human beings. The sun is the biggest, you need to know, the sun is the biggest source of energy on this planet. Pretty much all the energy that we have on this planet comes from the sun. And our relationship to the sun and to light in general, I think, is critical to our health and well-being. Now, you've heard about this term circadian rhythm, and pretty much all organisms on this planet have a circadian rhythm, which means that their physiology, their bodies, their existence is in tune with the cycles of day and night. So for humans, we have a central kind of pacemaker or a central clock in our brains, which is called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. You don't really need to know that, but there's a part of our brain which dictates the day-night rhythms in our body. And that part of our brain, the SCN, suprachiasmatic nucleus, it primarily gets this information where? Through the eyes. Primarily gets that information from where? The sun. So we have this central clock called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which gets information from our eyes primarily, and then it gets that information and it uses that information to then dictate what's going on in the rest of the body. And actually, the whole body, all of the organs and cells pretty much in our bodies also have molecules. Molecules are atoms joined together. That's what a molecule is. Tiny, tiny little things. Pretty much all of our cells in our bodies have in them molecules which serve the function of a clock. They also dictate the rhythm of that particular cell or that particular tissue or organ. So our whole body is basically working to a rhythm that is given to us by our external environment. Now, the way that these clocks, or the central clock, sends the messages is through things like hormones, temperature changes, obviously nerves. It can send messages through the nervous system as well. Healthy humans, a healthy life comes about when we are in tune with our environment. So when we are living in tune with the day-night cycles, that's when all of the messages are being sent at the right time to make our organs do the right things at the right time. When we are not living in tune with that rhythm, our external rhythm, when we're not living in tune, for example, we're not getting bright light at night, and at nighttime we're getting bright light when we should be getting darkness. That's called circadian misalignment, when our external environment is not in tune with our external environment. And this is where I've really got bogged down in a rabbit hole of different things. But just to say, so when you look at the most obvious way of showing this is to look at jet lag. When you travel from one hemisphere to another, when you travel across the planet Earth, not north-south really, but when you travel across different time zones, you have jet lag, which is when you're all over the place, your mind's a bit fuzzy, your body's out of sync with where you now are. That is an example of being out of circadian alignment. But it's not just jet lag, it's also shift work. Shift workers have been the ones where a lot of this study has taken place. And they've shown that amongst shift workers, and shift workers obviously who work night shifts or, irregular hours, you see circadian misalignment. And as a result, you do see an increased prevalence of certain conditions which are related to when the body is supposed to be doing certain things. Type 2 diabetes is the classic example. Type 2 diabetes is much more prevalent amongst shift workers. And why is that? Well, because what is diabetes? Type 2 diabetes, is when the body is to do with the metabolism of sugar, basically. So when we eat, we release, we digest our food, it goes through our digestive system, and then it goes into our blood, and lots of glucose goes into our blood. And we need glucose for living. That's where we get energy from. And so what happens is that, of course, you don't want the sugar to remain in the blood. You want the sugar to be taken off to the organs or taken off to storage, wherever it needs to be taken off to. And that is the job of insulin. When the glucose is in the blood, then the brain, the body sends insulin into the blood as well, which takes the glucose and kind of chaperones the glucose off to where it's got to go. But in type 2 diabetes, the body is it becomes resistant to insulin or is unable to produce enough insulin. And when that happens, blood sugar levels spike up to, chronically high levels. And then that's when you see all kinds of, poor health outcomes with diabetes. And the point is that insulin secretion and glucose metabolism has circadian rhythms to it. There's certain times where that's supposed to be happening in the daytime, not at nighttime and so forth. And shift workers, like I said, because they're living out of sync with their circadian rhythms, they have a much higher prevalence of type 2 diabetes. And I should say at this point as well that black people here in the UK are more likely to be shift workers than are white people. And I've done a video on social care, on care work, and how a lot of black African people in particular are care workers. So imagine, not to mention the low pay and the poor working conditions that they have, heavy, strenuous work that they're doing, they're also mashing up their circadian rhythms, which is also mashing up their bodies. So that's just one example. There were many other examples as well, and other gastrointestinal disorders. So the digestive system, if you want to call it, also operates according to strict circadian rhythms. There's certain times when we're supposed to be digesting food, certain times we're supposed to be metabolizing the nutrients in food, and certain times that we're not supposed to be metabolizing the nutrients. And again, when we're out of sync with our circadian rhythm, when our circadian rhythms are misaligned, this is where you have an increasing prevalence of gastrointestinal disorders. And this includes things like obesity, it includes diabetes, it includes also hypertension as well. In my last video, I talked about how hypertension is very, very high amongst African and Caribbean people here in the UK. So these topics are relevant to all of us, but particularly relevant to us as Black people here in the UK when we're thinking about the health disparities that we face here in the UK. Now, the key point is that light is absolutely critical to this. And this is something I'm really going to dig into in future. But the body uses the message of light coming from outside to determine what the body should be doing. So, for example, in the daytime, we need light, and we need particularly, I don't know if you know that the sunlight or light comes in different wavelengths. The big wavelengths are colors like red, and then colors we can't see, light we can't see, such as infrared, has very long wavelengths like that. And then the shorter the wavelengths get, the different, some of the colors we can see. So green has got slightly longer wavelengths, yellow and so forth. And then blue is one of the strongest wavelengths that we can actually see with our eyes. Blue light is absolutely critical to us in the daytime. We need blue light for alertness, for cognitive function, for being ready to deal with the day. And actually, there've been various studies showing that the lack of blue light in the daytime is probably linked to the rates of cognitive decline that we're seeing, particularly amongst children, because a lot of children barely get outside. They barely get any natural sunlight. So we need that blue light in the daytime. However, in the nighttime, we do not need that blue light. When we have blue light exposure in the night time, when we're supposed to be sleeping, that blue light exposure, one, stops the body from releasing melatonin. Melatonin is a molecule which basically is a superpower of antioxidants that is released through the body when we're asleep and goes through the body, cleaning out the debris, molecular debris, cell damage, all that sort of stuff, restoring us, refreshing us. It also sends the message, we think it sends a message to the whole body that it's dark and it's time to sleep. So we need melatonin. Melatonin is absolutely critical. And it's absolutely critical that we have nice deep sleep so that the melatonin can go through the body and heal us. However, most of us in this modern life that we're living, we're on our screens, we're watching TV, phones, laptops or whatever till deep into the night. And so we're preventing our bodies from healing themselves at night. Also, blue light it triggers something called cortisol. Cortisol, again, it's a hormone that we need for all the alertness and cognitive function, all that sort of stuff. But too much blue light, particularly at night, it triggers this cortisol. And cortisol is a stress hormone. We need a bit of stress, in the daytime for what we're doing. But at night, that is putting us on edge unnecessarily. And what happens then is that if there's two things actually to talk about there, is that there's this thing called the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which is basically the hypothalamus is a part of the brain where the suprachiasmatic nucleus is, the central clock is. That hypothalamus then, when there's blue light particularly, sends hormonal messages down to the kidneys, to the adrenal glands, to release cortisol. And that governs it's a stress response. It puts us on, edge, ready to deal with whatever the stressor is. But of course, if we're doing that all deep into the night, instead of healing and resting, we're putting ourselves on edge. That is going to have an impact again on our mental and physical well-being. I also want to just mention the nervous system. So being on edge as well, when we get that blue light message that goes into our hypothalamus, that also sends a message to our nervous system. But the part of the nervous system which is not so much the brain per se and the spinal column, but it's called the autonomic nervous system. This is the part of our nervous system that deals with those things that are outside of our deals with those things that are outside of our conscious awareness. So digestion and, breathing and, all that sort of stuff that we do subconsciously, deals with a lot of those kinds of things. And what happens is that when they also call the sympathetic nervous system is also called the fight or flight part of the nervous system. The parasympathetic nervous system is called the rest and digest. So you need the fight or flight or freeze part of the nervous system because, sometimes you need to fight or you need to flight, you need to run away. You need to be on edge when you're trying to run away from danger, or you need to be on edge when there's, something, uncertainty has come. However, can you imagine we are bombarding ourselves with blue light all the time? And so we're constantly putting ourselves in this fight or flight state. So what you imagine that we're in that fight or flight state. When we're in the fight or flight state, that means the rest and digest part of our nervous system is inactivated. The fight or flight state, or the sympathetic nervous system, shuts off the restorative functions, shuts off the digestion, shuts off the, those healing rest and the restfulness. It shuts all that off, cuts off blood supply to all of those things, and sends blood shooting up to our brain to keep us alert and functioned. And so chronic activation of the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight part of our nervous system, of course, is connected to chronic conditions. It is actually connected to, these things that I'm talking about here with the HPA axis and the sympathetic nervous system. It's connected with depression, anxiety, metabolic syndrome, which is obesity, hypertension, high blood, low levels of good cholesterol, high levels of bad cholesterol, that sort of stuff. These things, fam, when I check it, when I'm reading these things, I'm seeing that basically the way that we live our lives is basically making us very, very sick. And it's simple things like I said, going on our phones at night, watching TV at night, stressing ourselves out at night with these stressors, the blue light, the bright lights and so forth, not getting darkness at night, shutting off the melatonin. And then in the daytime, we're supposed to be in bright light. We're supposed to be outside. The light outside is much, much brighter than it is inside. And so we're supposed to be outside. But I believe that most people barely spend any time actually getting sunlight. And by the way, when I say sunlight, I don't just necessarily mean bright sunshine. I just mean even on a cloudy day outside, you are getting far more light if you measure it by the lux, the strength of it, the amount of photons that are hitting you, you are getting far more intense light, even on a cloudy day outside, than you are getting inside. But our eyes don't really recognize the difference. Our eyes are kind of the conscious part of our eyes, if you like, don't really recognize it. But it was really clear. I recommend that you get a lux meter. You can download a lux meter on your phone, and then just start checking. Put it up to the light in your indoors and check. You'll probably get like a maximum in the morning. I did it this morning. It was like 50 lux inside in the morning when I woke up about 6:30. I went outside again. It wasn't that bright. It was about 3,000, 5,000 lux out there. On a fairly bright day, like it is right now as well. I'm recording this video at 9:30 in the morning. Right now outside, it's probably about 50,000 lux. Whereas inside this room right now, if I quickly check it, it is, if I shine it that way toward the window, look, you can see there. Don't know if you can read that. That's about 250 lux. And I know that outside, even moving it closer to the window, it's like 600 lux. And if I go outside, it'll be 10,000 lux. The point is that we're supposed to get that bright light outside in the daytime. And so I also want to talk about the fact that, yes, there's blue light. All the different wavelengths do different things to our physiology. There is also ultraviolet light. We hear a lot about ultraviolet light. White people in particular are made to be terrified of ultraviolet light because of skin cancer. And yes, ultraviolet light can contribute to skin cancer. However, we need ultraviolet light. We need ultraviolet light to synthesize vitamin D in our skin. Vitamin D is a very crucial steroid hormone that we need. But also ultraviolet light, along with blue light and potentially red and near infrared light, generates something in it helps to lower our blood pressure, basically. And we think that's because when the sunlight goes onto our skin, it releases nitric oxide in our skin, not nitrous oxide, not laughing gas. Nitric oxide is a molecule, a simple molecule. And it seems like when the particularly ultraviolet and blue light hits our skin, there are stores in there, certain like precursors of nitric oxide, which are activated to release nitric oxide. And nitric oxides, one of the most important things that this nitric oxide molecule does is it's called vasodilation. It helps to relax and open up our blood vessels. And I've talked about hypertension. I've talked about how hypertension is very prevalent, particularly amongst African and Caribbean people in the UK. Hello. So I was talking about nitric oxide and how it helps our blood vessels to relax. Hypertension is high blood pressure. High blood pressure is when the blood vessels are tight, and so the blood is going through far too fast, which can cause organ failure and death. Hypertension is one of the most important precursors to cardiovascular disease. Cardiovascular disease, that is diseases to do with the heart and the circulation of blood, are, I believe, the biggest killer in the world aside from communicable diseases. So hypertension is a very, very serious thing that we need to deal with. Getting out in the sunlight in the daytime, gets that ultraviolet, gets that blue light onto our skin. And again, it doesn't have to be bright sunshine all the time. Because people will say, oh, there's no sunlight in the UK. There's always sunlight everywhere in the world. Yes, in the winter, there's not that much ultraviolet light, but there's a massive amount of near infrared light. There's all the visible light as well still. And all of that is helping to relax our blood vessels. So again, the circadian rhythm is not just about when we sleep and about having darkness at night. It's also about when we're awake and when we're alert and having brightness out in the daytime. Also ultraviolet light helps to generate melanin. And melanin, everyone can create melanin in their skin. Melanin is an antioxidant, a powerful antioxidant. Melanin absorbs ultraviolet light, ultraviolet energy, and uses that. The research around what exactly it does with that is still quite new or early in Western science, in formal science. But melanin is a very powerful antioxidant. It's an energy transducer. I've seen some reports recently how they're looking at using human melanin, to coat certain nanoparticles, which they can, put in the body for conducting electricity or, something like that. We've got this in our skin. Obviously, the darker skinned you are, the more of this that you have. But when the sun is out, get yourself out there. Even if you're a light-skinned white person, get yourself out in the sun, take precautions. You don't have to be out in the direct sunlight all the time. Get out in the shade, as well. And reap the benefits of alertness, improved cognitive function, improved mood. The skin has a neuroendocrine system, which it said can release beta endorphins and serotonin and all this sort of stuff, which are neurotransmitters that help improve our mood, they help improve our clarity. And then I mentioned melatonin. I want to talk about near infrared. This is a new area of research, but I'm absolutely fascinated by this because melatonin, yes, at night we need no light to come through the eyes so that the pineal gland will start to release melatonin into the bloodstream to heal and restore our body. But evidence is emerging that in the daytime, melatonin is released in massive quantities in the skin and also in the digestive system, the gastrointestinal tract, released in massive quantities from two things. One, exercise. There's studies that show when people have been made to do exercise, that the melatonin levels in their bodies, in their blood, has gone massively high up into the, much higher than it ever gets at night. And then also it's been found that red and near infrared light also triggers the production of melatonin in our cells, in our bodies, pretty much all in our skin. So what seems to be going on there is that I talked about the wavelengths, yeah? You got the wavelengths. Ultraviolet light, you might say it's like that, really, 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 really small wavelengths, short wavelengths, which means it's very, very powerful energy coming. At the other end of the spectrum that reaches the Earth, you have infrared, which is massive, massive, massive wavelengths. And they are very low energy, but they're able to penetrate much deeper. And so whereas ultraviolet light, for example, only penetrates just a tiny little bit into our skin, like very, very short, and then it's dealt with by the skin cells, and the melanocytes, absorb it and deal with it. Near infrared light from the sun penetrates right the way through our bodies. It penetrates through our skulls, guys, through the bone. And when it gets into our brains, it's been shown that the near infrared light then kind of like is, what's the word? Not absorbed, not reflected. I can't remember what the word is, but it's basically, it bounces around in the liquid, in the cerebral spinal fluid. It goes all the way deep down into the folds of the brain, for example, because it's kind of ping-ponged around all the way through. And the idea is that it does that, and it's thus able to affect our neurons in our brains. It's able to affect our brain cells. And why is this important? Well, one of the growing problems in the Western world is neurodegenerative diseases. We're talking about things like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease and multiple sclerosis and things like that, which are when the neurons in our brains degenerate, fail and die, basically. And it's related to neuromelanin, very, very fascinating topic. But some researchers, and there's some clinical applications of this that have just started to come out, have found that if you shine infrared light onto people's brains, onto people's heads, that actually helps to alleviate the symptoms of neurodegenerative diseases. And the work is going on furiously to find out, well, maybe we can prevent neurodegeneration by using near infrared light. Fascinating stuff. So with that in mind, us getting out in the daytime. Now, guys, you must know, there's something you need to know, is that the majority of the solar spectrum, the majority of the light that comes from the Earth, we can't see it with our eyes because most of it is infrared, near infrared light. In addition, the majority of the light that gets into our bodies is near infrared light. It's something like 70%, it's been estimated, 70% of the light that gets into our cells, that impinges on our human cells, is this near infrared light. This is not by accident. I said at the top of the video that we were created, or we have evolved in tandem with the light that we get from the sun. So it's not an accident. It is not an accident that near infrared light is so readily absorbed deeply into our bodies. And the way that you can see this as well, if you get your phone, just a little experiment, get your phone and put the torch on your phone, put it on your thumb, put the torch on your thumb, and then you'll see what color will your thumb be. It will be red. Why is that? Because all the light coming from the torch is bright white light. Yeah, so it's got all the colors a lot of the colors of the electromagnetic spectrum. But those colors, those light beams, those waves are all being absorbed by the thumb. The light that's coming through is the red light. And if we could see infrared, it would be the infrared light that's coming all the way through. Same if you put it on your hand. If you put it on your hand there, in between the thumb and forefinger, and put a light there, you'll see the color will be red because the red is coming through. A couple of researchers have pointed out that near infrared light also goes deeply into amniotic fluid, which is the fluid in the belly, in the womb of where the fetus is developing. The baby's developing in the mother's womb. And Scott Zimmerman and Russell Reiter, speculated that, when early on in pregnancy, the skin on the mother's belly blocks ultraviolet light and other visible light from getting through, but it lets in all of that near infrared light deep down into the baby, and then as the pregnancy continues and the belly fattens, the skin stretches out, and then only later on, the light, visible light and ultraviolet light is able to go through. is there something going on there about how important near-infrared light is to early human development, fetal development? And then another point they made, which I find this so interesting. I really love Scott Zimmerman because he's a white guy, a white American guy, but he often brings up African black people and the specifics of the optics of black bodies with regard to light. And he points out that, you know, like when a baby's born, a black baby's born, often they'll be a lot lighter when they're born than they will be a few months later. And he suggests that, well, maybe that's something to do with the fact that the babies need that ultraviolet light to be getting deeply, all of the light to be getting deeply into their bodies once they're born. And then it's only later on that the base melanin levels, kick in after they've gone through a certain amount of development. Fascinating stuff. And one more thing I want to say is that it's been shown that light penetrates far deeper into youngsters, into children, than it does into adults. Red light, near-infrared light still goes deeply all the way. It goes all the way through them with basically no hindrance. So what's going on there, guys? It's this near-infrared light and this long wave light appears to be absolutely critical to our development as humans and also to our brains. Our brain function, our neuro function, and again, sorry to say as well, I forgot to say that the melatonin, it's been shown that melatonin is generated in the mitochondria, which is in almost all of our cells in the human body. I told you that melatonin is a powerful, powerful antioxidant. Its metabolites are powerful antioxidants. So near-infrared radiation, near-infrared light comes in from the sun and triggers the production of melatonin in our mitochondria, which are in nearly every cell. Also, exercise triggers the production of melatonin in our mitochondria. The idea is that the melatonin is created to deal with the damage that is created when we do normal stuff like exercise, And so by divorcing ourselves from natural sunlight in the daytime, also divorcing ourselves from physical activity in the daytime, we are preventing our bodies from dealing with the damage, the oxidative cell damage that happens through normal human life. And that to try to wrap it up now, I believe that these things that I've talked about here, are those the main things I want to say? Yeah, these things that we're talking about here, I think are the root causes of the mental disorders, skyrocketing mental disorders. If you think about, we've been talking about special educational needs, for example, how much of the rise of these needs and things like autism and stuff like that, other conditions can be pinpointed as being caused by children are not going out in the daytime. Children are having bright lights in the nighttime. Children are eating at the wrong times. I've talked about light, but eating is one of those things that sends a message to our brains as to what time of day it is. And if we're eating late at night, 9, 10 o'clock at night, 11 o'clock at night, in bright light, we're just discombobulating ourselves. And then it's even worse for children who are even more sensitive to these things. They're eating late. They're waking up late. They're not going outside in the daytime. They're not getting bright light, sunlight in the daytime. At nighttime, they're sitting in front of screens, blue light bombarding their eyes at night from the screens and from the games and from the phones and stuff like that. They're going to bed late. They're maybe having lights on at night. They're having I've seen statistics about a large proportion of children have TVs in their rooms, for goodness sake, at night. For me, this is where my energies are going to be focused anyway, and this is where we absolutely. In my few upcoming videos, I'm gonna really start to break some of these individual points apart. Try to link them as much as I can to topical issues, because I do want to make sure that people will see these videos. If I call a video something like "The Impact of Light on Human Health," not many people are going to watch it. The people who do watch it will watch it and will absorb it and get a lot out of it, and that would be great. But I also want to make sure that I can use this platform while it's here, while I have it, in a way that will reach as many people as possible. And that requires a little bit of, being smart with titles and thumbnails and all this sort of nonsense, which these hoops that you have to jump through to actually connect with people. But I hope that's been a good video. I hope I've given you some food for thought. I will absolutely start to, dig more into these things, and I will share some sources and some links. In the meantime, not trying to keep you on the internet for too long, because I want you to get outside, at least listen to this outside on your phone while you're in the daytime. But I do have like I said, a few videos that I did in 2024, which went a little bit into more detail on some of these points to do with ultraviolet light and nitric oxide and vitamin D and all that sort of stuff. So check that out here. And I would appreciate your comments and your thoughts and insights as well. And if you could point me in the right direction as well, about where I could go to get better and more information on these topics. All right. So take good care of yourselves, and I will speak to you next time. All right. Peace, touch grass, and kiss the sky.